I'm a 28-year-old guy, and a few months ago, I finally made the decision to move across the country for a job I had worked years to get. It wasn't just a job, it was the job. Better pay, a city I had always dreamed of living in, and finally, a chance to build a life for myself. I knew my family wouldn't take the news well. We had always been close, or at least, that's what I thought. I was the oldest with a 25-year-old sister and a 22-year-old brother. Growing up, I had always been the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who could be counted on. And apparently, without ever realizing it, I had also been cast as the one who would never leave. So when I told them I was moving, it was like I had announced I was cutting all ties and moving to another planet. My mom was the first to react. She started crying right away. Big, dramatic, like I had just told her I was never coming back. She kept repeating the same things over and over. I don't know how I'm going to handle things without you. You're really just leaving us behind? My dad didn't say much at first, just sat there looking grim, which was worse. When he finally spoke, it was short and to the point. Are you sure about this? You know it's not easy out there. My sister was pissed. No attempt at hiding it. Wow. So you're really that selfish? You're just gonna abandon us? My brother, more passive about it, just shook his head and muttered something about how he never thought I'd actually leave. I tried to explain. This wasn't about abandoning anyone. This was about my career, about finally doing something for me. I wasn't moving out of spite or to hurt them. I was just moving. But every conversation turned into an emotional intervention. It didn't matter what I said. They had already decided I was betraying them. Then came the comparisons. Your cousins all stayed close. You know, in other cultures, family sticks together. Parents get taken care of. What do people do when their kids just run away from them? My mom was especially insistent on that last one, always throwing in little comments about how good sons don't just pack up and leave. It took about a week before the financial concerns started creeping in. My dad, always the one to phrase things carefully, suddenly started asking if I had really thought things through. You're gonna be okay financially, right? Which, yeah, the new job paid more, the city wasn't cheap, but I had done the math. I was fine, they knew I was fine, but the way he said it, the way he kept bringing it up, was like he was planting a seed, like he wanted me to start doubting myself, second-guessing whether I could really pull this off. Then came the final push. Just wait a year. 1 year, just to see how things go. It was framed as reasonable, but it wasn't. They just wanted me to stall long enough to make it harder to leave. I refused. I told them, politely but firmly, that I had made my decision. I was leaving in 2 months, and that was final. That was the turning point. The warmth started draining from their interactions. Conversations got shorter, colder, the group chats got quiet. My sister, normally the one spamming with memes, barely texted anymore. When she did, it was one-word answers. My mom stopped calling every day. Even my dad, who had always been distant but still present, seemed disappointed. Then, when I started packing, I noticed something strange. They stopped caring. Before, they had been all over me with guilt and reasons to stay. But now, nothing. No hovering, no passive-aggressive remarks. It was almost like they had given up. I should have found it suspicious, but at the time I was just relieved. I told myself they had finally accepted my decision and moved on. Then came the actual goodbye. No big farewell dinner. No emotional send-off. Just my dad giving a stiff nod, my mom looking like she wanted to cry but holding back, and my sister barely even looking at me. My brother mumbled a good luck, and that was it. It was weird. Forced. Like they were just checking a box, saying the bare minimum. But honestly, I didn't care. I was free. I packed up my car, hit the road, and for the first time in my life, I felt like my future was actually mine. The first few weeks were an adjustment. The city was everything I had imagined. The job was amazing. The people were different, fast-paced, ambitious. But I liked it. I missed certain things about home, but overall, I was happy. And then, just a few months after I left, I found out the real reason they wanted me to stay. And that changed everything. It had been a few months since I moved, and things had finally started to settle down. Work was good, I was getting used to the city, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually in control of what happened next. My family, on the other hand, had gone radio silent. At first, I thought it was just the natural distance that happens when someone moves far away. They had been cold when I left, but I figured they'd come around eventually. Calls and texts were rare now, and when they did happen, they felt forced, like they were only checking in because they felt like they had to. My sister barely responded to messages, and when she did, it was short, passive-aggressive replies. My parents, who used to call every day, suddenly didn't have much to say anymore. Then, my younger brother called. It was just a casual conversation at first. Basic stuff, how things were going, what he was up to. Then, out of nowhere, he let something slip. Yeah, well, ever since you left, the plan kind of fell apart. I asked him what he meant. There was a long pause, then he quickly backtracked. Never mind, forget I said anything. It hit me then, maybe he hadn't been entirely in the dark after all. Maybe he had known something, but not the full extent of it. Maybe he had assumed, just like everyone else, that I would step in without question. That stuck with me. The plan? What plan? After that, things got even weirder. My parents and sister became even more distant, barely responding to anything. I noticed my sister had posted something cryptic on social media, Something about fake family members who run away when things get real. It didn't mention me directly, but it didn't have to. A few days later, I got a call from an old neighbor back home. It was a friendly conversation, just catching up. Then, offhandedly, they mentioned something strange. Yeah, your parents have been talking about some big changes ever since you left. Sounded serious. That was the second time someone had referenced something happening behind the scenes. I needed answers, so I called my cousin, the only one in the family who didn't play mind games. It didn't take much for him to spill the truth. My family had been counting on me to stay, not just emotionally, financially. Turns out, my parents were in serious financial trouble. They had been struggling with the mortgage for a while, but had never mentioned a word of it to me. The whole time I was growing up, they had been quietly assuming that I would step up and take over. They never asked me, never even hinted at it. They had just decided, without my knowledge, that it would be my responsibility to keep the house going once they couldn't afford it anymore. My sister and brother were in on it too. They had already agreed, without even talking to me, that I'd be the one to handle the bulk of the burden. The whole reason they had fought so hard to keep me from moving was because I was their plan, and the worst part, they had no backup. If I didn't step in, they were screwed. I sat with that information for a while, letting it sink in. Everything suddenly made sense. The guilt trips, the desperate attempts to make me stay, the weird shift in their behavior once they realized I wasn't changing my mind. They weren't upset that I was gone. They were upset that their solution was gone. I called my parents. At first, they played dumb. What are you talking about? Of course we wanted you to stay, your family. But when I pressed harder, when I told them I knew about their financial situation, about the mortgage, about how they had been expecting me to handle it, there was a long silence. Then finally, my dad sighed. We just thought you would understand. That was the excuse. That was their reason for not telling me. They assumed I would just figure it out. When I asked why they never just told me, my dad got defensive. It's not like we were manipulating you. It's called family helping family. Family helping family. That's what they called trapping me into taking on a responsibility I never agreed to. I told them straight up if they had just been honest with me, if they had come to me and explained what was going on, I might have been willing to help. But instead, they chose to guilt trip and manipulate me. That's when my mom started crying. She kept repeating how selfish I was, how I abandoned them, how I didn't care about my own family. The call ended in frustration. I couldn't even get a straight answer out of them. Just excuses, guilt, and more attempts to make me feel like I was the villain. And that was when I started wondering if I should cut ties altogether. It didn't take long for my family to go from passive-aggressive silence to full-on smear campaign. At first, it was little things. My mom stopped responding to texts entirely. My sister, who had already been distant, unfollowed me on social media. My dad, nothing but one-word replies, if he answered at all. It was like they had officially decided I didn't exist. Then, my cousins started reaching out. First one, then another. Hey, is everything okay with your parents? They're saying you just up and left them struggling. The messages kept coming. I heard you abandoned them in debt. Why aren't you helping them if they're in trouble? That's when I realized what was happening. My parents weren't just mad. I had officially become the villain in their version of events. They had started telling extended family that I had left them to suffer while I lived it up in a new city. No mention of the years of guilt tripping. No mention of their plan to dump financial responsibilities on me. Just the classic woe is us, our ungrateful son left us behind. I set the record straight. One by one I responded. I didn't rant, I didn't get emotional, I just told them the facts. They never once asked for help. They never sat me down and explained their situation. They tried to manipulate me into staying so I would be forced to take over their financial mess. I had never agreed to be their safety net. Most of them went quiet after that. A few responded with sympathy, saying they hadn't known the full story. Others, though, doubled down. But they're your parents. Family helps each other. You could afford to help them now, though, right? Then, my mom took it public. A long, emotional Facebook post appeared on her profile, full of dramatic language. A mother's heart breaks when her child forgets where they came from. I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own son would abandon us in our time of need. Some children only care about money. It was designed for maximum impact, and it worked. People flooded the comments with sympathy. Distant relatives, old family friends, even neighbors, everyone jumped in to say how terrible it was that a son would do this to his parents. I didn't respond. I refused to get dragged into a public argument. But my sister wasn't about to let it go. She sent me a long, angry message. I can't believe you turned your back on us. You had every opportunity to help, and you just left. I'll never forgive you. Then she blocked me. The only person who didn't outright attack me was my younger brother. He was quiet at first, but then I got a message from him late one night. It was short. I didn't realize how bad things were. I'm sorry. That was the closest thing to an apology I had gotten from anyone in my family. Then, my dad finally broke his silence. No passive aggressiveness this time. Just straight to the point. You could help us if you wanted to. We wouldn't be in this situation if you weren't so selfish. So there it was. No more pretending. No more beating around the bush. They wanted money. Now that the truth was out and they couldn't manipulate me anymore, they had resorted to just asking for it outright. I told him no. I wasn't going to reward their dishonesty. I wasn't going to pay my way back into the family. Then, out of nowhere, an aunt called me, one I hadn't spoken to in a while. She had seen everything, the Facebook post, the messages, all of it. She told me she understood why I walked away. Apparently, this wasn't the first time my parents had expected someone else to bail them out. They had a history of leaning on family members when things got tough, always playing the victims, always guilt-tripping until someone caved. But here's where it gets even worse. I found out, through that same aunt, that my parents were already planning to sell the house. That was their backup plan all along. They weren't completely out of options. They weren't on the verge of losing everything. If I had agreed to stay and take over the mortgage, I would have been trapped in a situation that wasn't even necessary. All of the guilt tripping, the manipulation, the Facebook pity party, it wasn't about saving their home. It was about control. A week later, I heard from another cousin that my family had actually held a meeting with extended relatives. The topic? What to do about me. It sounded extreme, but it wasn't entirely surprising. My parents had always leaned on family support, especially in times of financial strain. Maybe they were hoping to convince someone else to pressure me into helping. Or maybe they were just trying to rally sympathy for themselves. That was when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a family disagreement. This was about keeping me under their control. And now that I had broken free, they were scrambling to find a way to reel me back in. I started considering going low contact, maybe even no contact. A few days after the family meeting, my younger brother called me again. He told me our parents didn't mean it like that they missed me. I didn't answer, because one thing was clear, I would never let them manipulate me again. A few weeks after the so-called family meeting, things had been oddly quiet. My parents weren't reaching out, my sister was still ignoring me, and my younger brother, while not hostile, had stopped checking in as much. It felt like they had finally given up. Then, I got a text from my dad. It was short and vague, but the message was clear. If I didn't fulfill my responsibilities, there would be consequences. I stared at it for a while, trying to figure out what he meant. I wasn't tied to their house or debts in any way. My name wasn't on the mortgage, I hadn't co-signed anything, and legally, there was no reason I should be responsible for anything they owed. But the wording, consequences, made it sound like they had something planned. Just to be sure, I booked a consultation with a lawyer. After looking over everything, the lawyer confirmed what I already knew. I owed them nothing. There was no legal way for them to force me to take on their debts. At most, they could try to guilt me into paying, but that was it. So, I called my dad. I went straight to the point, asking what exactly he meant by fulfill my responsibilities. The response was defensive, dodging the question, trying to twist things around. He said I was taking it the wrong way, and that I was making this harder than it needed to be. Before I could even process that nonsense, my mom called. She was crying, full meltdown mode. I don't recognize you anymore. You've changed. You're not the son I raised. It was the same script I had heard before, just turned up to 11. Every attempt at making me feel guilty, every trick in the book. I didn't entertain it. I told her I wasn't getting dragged into another conversation like this, and I hung up. Not even 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, this time, a long message from my sister. It was pages of insults, accusations, and dramatic statements about how heartless and selfish I was, how I had turned my back on the family, how I had abandoned them just when they needed me most. And then, at the very end, the cherry on top. You're a traitor to this family. I didn't respond. A day later, my younger brother messaged me. His tone was different. He wasn't angry, just conflicted. He said he felt stuck in the middle, that he didn't know what to do. He wanted to support me, but he also didn't want to go against our parents. That was when I realized something. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even just about control. It was about loyalty. In their minds, I hadn't just moved away. I had betrayed them. The way they saw it, I wasn't just refusing to help. I was choosing to abandon them. And because I wasn't backing down, they decided to take things further. They went silent. No calls, no texts, no emails. At first, I thought they had finally accepted reality, but then the messages from extended family started rolling in. Some were supportive. I heard what happened, and I just want you to know I understand. Others weren't. I don't know how you can sleep at night, knowing what you've done to your parents. You should be ashamed. Your mother is devastated. How could you do this to her? Then my dad sent another text. This time, there was no subtlety. If you really want to be free of us, then at least send $1,000 a month as compensation for raising you. I had to reread it. Twice. That was the logic now, that since I wasn't willing to take over their financial mess, I owed them money just for existing. I didn't even respond. I just laughed, deleted the message and moved on with my day. But my mom wasn't done yet. Another Facebook post went up. This one was even more dramatic than the last. Some children only care about money, not family. A mother's love means nothing to them. One day they will regret their choices, but by then it will be too late. The comment section was wild. Half the people were eating it up, sending her sympathy, telling her how strong she was, how heartbreaking it must be to have an ungrateful child. The other half, not so much. A few people started asking questions. What exactly did he do? Are you telling the whole story? And one comment, from someone who clearly knew the truth. Funny how you left out the part where you expected him to take over your debts. Then, an old friend from back home reached out. He had seen the post and wanted to know what was going on. That was when I realized something. I could spend forever trying to correct the record, explaining my side, making sure people understood the truth. But what was the point? My parents had already decided on their narrative. They had already painted me as the villain. So, I made a decision. I blocked my mom on social media. Then I went through my messages. Anyone who had clearly picked their side, anyone who had made it clear that they weren't interested in the truth, I blocked them too. For the first time, I wasn't just distancing myself. I was cutting them off. And honestly, it felt like a weight had finally been lifted. A few weeks had passed since I cut off contact with my parents and sister. Things had finally started to feel normal again. No guilt-tripping messages. No sudden demands for money. No dramatic Facebook posts. At least, none that I could see. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my landlord. They sounded concerned. My application for a new apartment had been flagged. Someone had tried to pull a credit report on me, and it triggered a fraud alert. I hadn't applied for any loans. I hadn't co-signed anything. There was no reason for anyone to be checking my financial records. Immediately, I called my bank. After verifying my identity, they confirmed that multiple attempts had been made to access my financial information over the past few weeks. Someone had tried to pull a full credit report, and there had even been a failed attempt to reset my online banking password. I knew exactly who was behind it. I didn't waste any time. I locked down everything, fraud alerts on all my accounts, a new password for every login, and an extra verification step for any transactions. I made sure no one, not even family, could get anywhere near my money. Then I called my dad. At first he denied everything. He acted confused, pretending he had no idea what I was talking about. But when I pushed harder, he finally slipped. We had to make sure you weren't struggling. That was the excuse. That was the justification for trying to access my financial records without my permission. They wanted to check if I could afford to help them. I didn't let him finish. I cut him off mid-sentence and hung up. Not even 10 minutes later, my younger brother called. He had no idea what had just happened. But the first thing he said was, "Mom and Dad are freaking out." I told him everything. The unauthorized credit check, the bank alerts, the fact that they had tried to break into my finances behind my back. He went quiet. Then after a long pause, he admitted something. They had been trying to find proof that I could afford to send them money. That was their plan all along. They wanted evidence to use against me, to convince extended family that I was just hoarding money while they suffered. The whole thing was just another manipulation tactic. That same night, my mom posted another Facebook rant. This one was even more ridiculous than the last. It was full of dramatic phrases, how some people think they're too good for their own blood, how no matter how much you sacrifice, some children will always turn their backs on you. It was clear she was trying to get sympathy from anyone who would listen. But this time, it backfired. A few hours later, I got a call from an uncle. He had seen the post and wanted to know what was going on. When I told him the truth, he was furious, but not at me. Then an aunt messaged me saying she couldn't believe my parents had actually tried to access my financial records. She told me she was done with their games and that she completely understood why I had walked away. Even some of my cousins reached out, saying they had seen the Facebook drama and weren't buying the victim act anymore. But my sister, she was still deeply involved in their version of the story. I woke up to a long message from her. According to her, I was overreacting. I was blowing things out of proportion. Mom and Dad were just concerned and wanted to understand my situation. That was it. That was the final straw. I opened the family group chat and sent one message. "I don't trust any of you anymore. I'm done." Then I started blocking. First my parents, then my sister. I kept my younger brother unblocked, but only because he wasn't actively part of the problem. For the first time in months, I felt free. The silence was immediate. No more messages. No more guilt trips. No more forced obligations. Then something unexpected happened. A few more family members reached out, not to guilt trip me, but to support me. Some of them had also been burned by my parents' manipulative behavior. Some of them had also been guilted into giving money, time, or support they didn't owe. And now that I had stood up to them, they felt like they could too. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone in this. A week later, my younger brother texted me again. This time, his message was different. "I think I might move out too. I see what you meant now." And just like that, the cycle was finally starting to break. A few weeks passed, and for the first time in months, there was silence. No texts, no calls, no guilt-tripping messages. My parents had gone completely quiet. Then, an email showed up in my inbox. It was from my dad. A long-winded message, full of flowery language about family bonds and forgiveness. He wrote about how no matter what happens, family is forever and how mistakes were made on both sides. It was obvious what he was doing. He wasn't apologizing, he was rewriting the story. At first, the email made it sound like he wanted to make amends, like he truly believed in healing the wounds between us. But by the third paragraph, the real reason for the email started showing. They still needed money. Buried between the sentimental lines about wanting to reconnect was the real message. If I was willing to help them financially, we could put everything behind us. It wasn't about fixing the relationship. It wasn't about understanding each other. It was about getting what they wanted. I didn't even respond. I just deleted it. A few days later, another email arrived, this time from my mom. This one was different. There was no fake warmth, no attempt at making it sound like reconciliation. This was pure guilt. She blamed me for everything. For tearing the family apart, for putting money above blood. She told me she was heartbroken and disappointed, as if I was the one who had tried to steal from her. I didn't respond to this one either. Then my sister sent a text. It was short, but dripping with passive aggressiveness. I hope you enjoy your perfect little life while we suffer. I ignored it. That night, my younger brother called. He sounded exhausted. He told me our parents were furious that I hadn't responded to their emails. They had been ranting for days about how I was selfish, about how I had no loyalty to my own family. Then the next morning, my mom took it to Facebook. Another dramatic post. Another round of public sympathy seeking. This time it was even more ridiculous than before. She wrote about how some parents give everything for their children, only to be left behind when they need help the most. How a child who forgets where they came from has lost their soul. People flooded the comments. Some of course ate it up. You're such a strong woman. It's heartbreaking how kids these days have no respect. I can't believe your own son would do this to you. But this time, something different happened. One of my cousins, someone who had been watching the situation unfold, finally spoke up. They left a comment. Funny how you keep leaving out the part where you tried to steal his financial information. That single comment changed everything. Within minutes, the tone of the replies started shifting. People started asking questions. Wait, what actually happened? Did he really abandon you, or is there more to this story? The post was deleted within the hour. Then, just like that, silence. No more texts, no more emails, no more desperate attempts to guilt trip me. At first, I thought they were just regrouping, trying to figure out a new angle. But days turned into weeks, and for the first time in years, my family wasn't trying to manipulate me. And that's when I realized something. They weren't staying quiet because they had changed. They were staying quiet because they knew they had lost control. By refusing to engage, by not explaining myself, by not letting them drag me back into their cycle of guilt and obligation, I had won. I was free. And life was good. My job was going great. I had started building real friendships, surrounding myself with people who actually cared about me without expecting anything in return. I wasn't just the family ATM anymore. I was me. A few months had passed since the last round of drama. The silence had stretched longer than I expected, but I wasn't complaining. For the first time in my life, I had peace. No guilt-tripping messages, no sudden demands for money, no Facebook posts twisting the truth. Then, a package arrived at my door. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was an old childhood photo album. No note, no explanation. I wasn't entirely surprised. My mother had always used nostalgia as a tool, bringing up happy memories whenever she wanted to smooth over something unpleasant. But this was calculated. Just pictures of me as a kid, birthday parties, family vacations, school events. There were old letters I had written to my parents when I was little. A few handmade cards from elementary school, and even some of my old report cards. Everything carefully placed to trigger nostalgia. A few minutes later, I checked my email. There it was, a long message from my mom. She wrote about family bonds, how we shouldn't let petty disagreements tear us apart, how life is too short to hold grudges. She didn't mention the credit fraud. She didn't mention the Facebook smear campaign. She didn't mention anything about what had actually happened. It was all carefully worded to make it sound like we had just drifted apart, like the past year hadn't been one giant battle of manipulation and betrayal. I put the album away. That night, my younger brother called. He asked if I had gotten the package. I told him I had. He hesitated, then admitted something. Our parents had switched strategies. The aggressive guilt-tripping hadn't worked, so now they were trying to pull me back in with sentimentality. The we just want to talk approach. And sure enough, the next day, my dad sent his own email. It was short. No mention of money this time. Just a simple line, "We don't want anything from you. We just want to talk." It sounded different. It sounded reasonable, but I had seen this pattern before. Every single time they reached out, there was always an ulterior motive. Every message, every call, every guilt trip, it had always led back to what they wanted. I needed to be sure. So I sent one email back, a single question. "Are you apologizing for trying to manipulate me?" A day passed, then 2, then 3. Finally, my dad responded. He didn't answer the question. Not directly. Instead, he went on about how complicated family is and how misunderstandings happen on both sides. He brought up old memories, shifted the blame, and made excuses, but never once did he say the words "we were wrong." That was all the answer I needed. Nothing had changed. The next day, my mom left a voicemail. Her voice was shaky, emotional. She said she didn't have much time left, that she just wanted to see her son one last time. But there was a problem. She wasn't sick. In fact, I had heard from my brother just days earlier that she had been perfectly fine, running errands, going about her life as usual. This wasn't a real plea. This was another lie. Another last-ditch effort to get me back under control. I didn't call her back. I didn't reply to my dad's email. I didn't acknowledge my sister's passive-aggressive posts online. Instead, I blocked their numbers. Again, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved. No more waiting for the next guilt trip. No more wondering when they would pull another stunt. No more obligation. Just peace. And I wasn't going to give that up again. A few weeks had passed since I blocked my parents again. The silence had stretched on, and I had finally started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had given up. No emails, no voicemails, no dramatic social media posts. Then, a message popped up from one of my cousins. "Dude, have you seen what your parents just posted?" I hadn't. I still had them blocked. But my cousin sent me a screenshot. There it was, a shiny brand new luxury car sitting in their driveway. My mom had posted a long caption about new beginnings and treating yourself after years of hard work. I wondered how they could afford it given their supposed financial struggles. Had they taken out a new loan, refinanced the house, or had their financial crisis been exaggerated all along? My dad was tagged in it, replying with comments about how dreams do come true. I stared at the picture for a long time. This was the same couple who had begged me for financial help. The same people who had tried to break into my bank records, who had told the entire family they were struggling and that I had abandoned them in their time of need. But here they were, posting online about their brand new car. I forwarded the screenshot to my younger brother. He saw it, then called me almost immediately. He was pissed. For months they had told him the same sob story, that they had nothing left, that they were barely scraping by, that I had left them in ruin. But clearly they weren't struggling. They were just hoping that if they cried loud enough, someone else, me, would step in and take on their financial burdens. A few hours later, an aunt commented on the post. "So I guess you guys are struggling, huh?" That was it. No long paragraph. No passive-aggressive remarks. Just a simple, sarcastic sentence. The post was deleted within minutes. Then my sister texted me. Apparently, she had decided that this was my fault too. She accused me of poisoning our younger brother's mind, of turning him against the family. She claimed that if I had just done my part, none of this would have happened. I didn't respond. I just blocked her. I was done. A week later, my younger brother told me he was officially moving out. He had started seeing everything for what it was. The manipulation, the guilt tripping, the lies. He didn't want to be a part of it anymore. He found a place with a friend and started making plans to move within the next month. That was when my mom made her final move. An email landed in my inbox. No mention of the deleted Facebook post. No mention of any of the real reasons we had gone low contact. Just a simple message: "We'd love to have you home for Christmas." Like nothing had happened. Like the last year of chaos and manipulation didn't exist. I didn't reply. Instead, I booked a trip with some friends. For the first time in my life, I spent the holidays exactly how I wanted. No guilt, no stress, no walking on eggshells, just pure drama-free peace. And for the first time ever, I actually enjoyed the holidays. A few months had passed since the last attempt at manipulation. No emails, no guilt tripping, no fake holiday invitations. It was over. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. It was my dad. He was using a different phone, probably because I had blocked all his other numbers. His voice was tense, serious. His voice was tense, serious. He went straight into it. "Mom is in the hospital. You need to come home." I didn't say anything at first. Even after everything, there was a part of me that hesitated. A small part that wondered, what if this time it's real? But I had seen this pattern before. The escalating guilt trips, the sudden shifts in tactics. This was just another attempt to pull me back in. But I had learned my lesson. Instead of panicking, I hung up and immediately called my younger brother. He picked up right away. I asked him point blank if Mom was in the hospital. There was a long pause. Then he sighed. She wasn't. She was fine. She was at home. There was no emergency. No hospital visit. No crisis. It was another lie. Another desperate attempt to get me to come back. I didn't waste time. I sent my dad one last text. "You officially lost me forever." Then I blocked the number. That was it. No more second chances. No more waiting for them to change. No more hoping for something that would never happen. I cut the last ties, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely free. The months that followed were the best I had ever had. My career was thriving. My friendships were stronger than ever. My younger brother, inspired by everything that had happened, started focusing on his future instead of getting dragged into our parents' mess. I started hearing things through the grapevine. My parents were still playing the victim, but fewer people were buying into it. The family drama had lost its effect. My sister, on the other hand, was still deep in it. She had chosen their side and remained bitter, stuck in the same toxic cycle. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Because for the first time, I finally understood something. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away and never look back. I'm a 26-year-old guy who recently landed my dream job as a project manager in a tech company. Growing up in a working-class family, ambition wasn't exactly encouraged. My parents always emphasized family loyalty over personal goals, and success was measured in terms of sacrifice, not achievements. While I've worked hard to reach where I am today, my family sees it differently. According to them, I've somehow become selfish for pursuing my dreams. To give you some context, my family has always been a bit traditional. My parents believe tech jobs are soulless and prefer good, honest, blue-collar work, something they've never been shy about reminding me of. My younger brother, who's 22, still lives at home, unemployed and relying on them for everything. And by everything, I mean literally everything. He doesn't even try to contribute around the house. Despite that, he's the golden child in their eyes. For years, I kept my head down, grinding my way through college and working side jobs to pay my bills. It wasn't easy. I had to juggle long hours, unpaid internships, and more than a few setbacks. But earlier this year, my hard work finally paid off, and I got an offer from a tech company I'd dreamed of working for since I was a teenager. It was the kind of job that promised stability, growth, and the chance to work on meaningful projects. I couldn't have been happier when I signed the contract. When I called my parents to share the news, I expected some sort of celebration, maybe even just a simple "we're proud of you." Instead, I got, "Don't forget where you came from." It wasn't said in a congratulatory way, it sounded more like a warning. My dad went on about how people in tech lose touch with reality and start thinking they're better than everyone else. I brushed it off at the time, chalking it up to their usual skepticism about anything outside their comfort zone. The first red flag came a few weeks later. I was in the middle of onboarding at my new job when my mom called to ask if I'd be sending money home now that I was doing so well. I explained that I had just started, was adjusting to a new city, and didn't have much saved up after the move. She didn't seem to care. She started going on about how my brother needed help finding his footing and how I should step up as the successful one in the family. At first, I thought it was just a one-off comment, but it kept coming up. My parents began dropping hints that I should move back home to save on rent and help with family expenses. They suggested that my brother could learn from me if I were around more. I politely declined, explaining that I'd worked hard to get where I was and wasn't about to throw it all away. That's when the guilt trip started. Every conversation turned into a lecture about how much they'd sacrificed for me and how it was my turn to give back. My mom kept saying things like, "We raised you, the least you can do is help us now," and my dad would chime in with, "Family comes first. Don't let success make you forget that." It didn't help that my brother was egging them on, mocking my job as just clicking buttons all day. I tried to keep the peace, but it was exhausting. I confided in my best friend, who suggested I set some boundaries. That was easier said than done. I wasn't used to standing up to my parents, especially since any form of pushback was always met with accusations of being ungrateful or disrespectful. Things escalated when I posted a photo of my new workspace on social media. It was nothing fancy, just my desk and a view of the city, but it sparked a full-blown argument. My mom called, accusing me of rubbing my success in their faces, and my dad doubled down, saying I'd changed since moving to the city. They claimed I was abandoning them and losing sight of what really mattered. The final straw came when my parents outright asked me to quit my job and move back home. They said I could find something closer to family and help them with bills while mentoring my brother. I was stunned. They weren't just asking for financial support, they wanted me to give up everything I'd worked for. When I refused, they accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. My dad even said, "We didn't raise you to turn your back on family." After that conversation, I knew I needed to take a step back. I started looking into therapy to help me navigate the situation. My therapist helped me understand that my family's behavior wasn't my fault, and that setting boundaries was essential for my mental health. It wasn't an easy decision, but I decided to focus on my career and well-being, even if it meant disappointing them. That's where things stand now. My parents are upset, my brother is bitter, and I'm trying to find my footing in this new chapter of my life. I know this is just the beginning, but for the first time, I feel like I'm living for myself, and that's a win in my book. Update 1. A few weeks after I decided to stick to my boundaries, things went from bad to worse. My parents called one evening, sounding more stressed than usual. They told me their financial situation was worse than I realized. They had fallen behind on bills, and my brother's unemployment wasn't helping. I knew they weren't doing great financially, but hearing them describe it made it clear they expected me to step in and save the day. They started dropping hints that if I didn't help, they'd lose the house. It didn't take long for the hints to turn into outright demands. My dad told me I needed to quit my job and move back home immediately. He said that if I refused, I'd be cut out of the family for good. My mom chimed in, accusing me of abandoning them in their time of need. It was an ultimatum: either give up everything I'd worked for or lose my family. I told them I couldn't do what they were asking and ended the call before the conversation spiraled any further. Meanwhile, work was going better than I could have hoped. I just wrapped up a major project that earned me recognition from upper management. My boss was impressed, and my team was celebrating the success. I even got a shout-out in a company-wide email. I shared a small update about the accomplishment on social media, not to brag but because I was genuinely proud of myself. That's when the drama kicked into high gear. My parents and brother saw my post and were furious. My mom posted a vague status about kids forgetting where they came from, and my brother left a snide comment under my post about how some people get lucky and think they're better than others. It didn't stop there. Over the next few days, my family kept posting passive-aggressive comments about ungrateful children and how family should come first. Extended relatives started messaging me, asking what was going on and why I wasn't helping my parents. It was humiliating. I decided to call my parents to confront them about the social media posts. They acted like they had no idea what I was talking about. My mom said she was just venting and didn't think I'd see it. My dad claimed I was overreacting and that I needed to stop being so sensitive. It was like talking to a wall. They didn't apologize, and instead, they doubled down on how I was letting success get to my head. Frustrated, I turned to Reddit for advice. I posted about the situation, detailing how my family was pressuring me to give up my career and move back home. Within hours, the post blew up. Thousands of people chimed in, sharing similar experiences and encouraging me to stick to my boundaries. Reading those comments was eye-opening. It made me realize I wasn't alone and that I didn't owe my family anything just because they were struggling. Feeling emboldened, I decided to stand my ground. I ignored their posts and focused on my work. But my parents weren't done. One Saturday morning, I heard a knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, there they were, my parents, standing in the hallway with serious looks on their faces. They said they wanted to talk, but I told them it wasn't a good time and asked them to leave. My mom started crying, saying they had driven hours just to see me, and my dad looked ready to explode. They refused to leave, so I told them I wouldn't let them in and shut the door. I could hear them talking outside for a few minutes before they finally left. I felt guilty, but I knew I couldn't give in. A few days later, the situation escalated again. My brother started prank calling my office, leaving fake messages and pretending to be clients. It didn't take long for my coworkers to figure out what was going on, and my boss pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay. I explained the situation, and to my surprise, she was incredibly understanding. She told me to take some time off if I needed it, and even offered to help if things got worse. At this point, I knew I needed to take more drastic action. I started looking into legal options, like issuing a cease and desist letter to stop the harassment. My therapist encouraged me to prioritize my own well-being and suggested I limit contact with my family entirely. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the right one. I blocked them on all social media and changed my phone number. It felt drastic, but I needed to protect my peace. I also informed my boss about the steps I was taking, just in case my brother tried to pull another stunt at work. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm determined to stay firm. My family might think I'm the bad guy, but I'm done letting their problems become my responsibility. This is my life, and I'm not giving it up for anyone. Update 2. After I blocked my family on social media and changed my number, I thought I'd finally have some breathing room. I underestimated just how determined they were to drag me back into their mess. Within days, my parents began reaching out to my friends. They spun a story about how I had abandoned them when they needed me most. They painted themselves as struggling parents just trying to reconnect with their ungrateful child, conveniently leaving out the part where they'd tried to make me quit my job and move home. Some of my friends, not knowing the full story, reached out to me with concern. They forwarded me screenshots of the messages my parents had sent. My mom claimed they were heartbroken and that they just wanted to talk. One friend even got a guilt-laden request to help convince me to do the right thing. I had to explain the situation to my friends, who were thankfully supportive once they understood what was really going on. Then, things took a nasty turn. One morning, I was pulled into a meeting with HR at work. My brother had sent an email to my boss, accusing me of unethical behavior. He claimed I was using company resources for personal gain and even attached screenshots of social media posts from months ago, trying to make it seem like I was slacking off on company time. It was ridiculous. Luckily, my boss and HR saw right through it. They reviewed everything and quickly cleared my name, but the whole ordeal was embarrassing. I had to explain that it was my brother trying to sabotage me. HR reassured me that they had my back and flagged the email for any future issues. Still, it was a wake-up call. My family wasn't just trying to guilt-trip me anymore. They were actively trying to destroy my career. As if that wasn't enough, my parents decided to escalate things publicly. They posted an open letter on Facebook, airing all of their grievances about how I'd betrayed them. The post was filled with dramatic claims about how they'd sacrificed everything for me, only to be abandoned when they needed me most. They conveniently left out the parts about their demands or the fact that my brother was contributing nothing to the household. The post gained traction among extended relatives, many of whom started reaching out to me. Aunts, uncles, cousins, they all messaged me, urging me to make things right and fix the situation with my parents. It was overwhelming. I felt like I was being attacked from every angle. I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. I took to Reddit again, sharing a detailed update with screenshots to back up my side of the story. I explained everything: the demands to quit my job, the prank calls, the sabotage attempt at work, and now the public shaming. The post blew up even bigger than the first one. Thousands of people chimed in, offering support and advice. Many of them called out my family's manipulative tactics, and some even shared their own stories of going through similar situations. It didn't take long for the backlash to reach my family. People began commenting on their Facebook post, pointing out the inconsistencies and calling them out for their behavior. My parents eventually deleted the post, but the damage had been done. I sent them a warning through a mutual contact, letting them know that if they continued to defame me or interfere in my life, I would pursue legal action. That warning didn't sit well with my brother. He went on a livestream rant, calling me every name in the book. He claimed I was brainwashed by success and accused me of abandoning real family values. He even tried to claim that I owed him for all the times he supported me growing up, which was laughable considering I'd been the one working odd jobs to pay for my own school supplies while he played video games. By this point, I'd had enough. My therapist helped me see that their behavior wasn't my responsibility, and that I didn't need to feel guilty for prioritizing my own life. I also started leaning on my coworkers, who rallied around me with encouragement and support. One of them even joked that I had my own personal fan club at work now, which helped lighten the mood. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation continued to decline. They'd over-leveraged themselves on loans, and without my brother contributing anything, it was catching up to them. I heard through the grapevine that they were struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments. It was clear that they weren't going to stop unless I took serious action. With my lawyer's help, I had a cease and desist letter drafted and sent to my family. The letter outlined everything: the harassment, the defamation, and the workplace sabotage. It made it clear that if they didn't stop, I wouldn't hesitate to escalate things legally. For the first time in what felt like forever, I started to feel a sense of peace. Blocking them, standing up for myself, and taking legal action were difficult steps, but they were necessary. I don't know if they'll ever truly understand the harm they've caused, but I do know that I can't let their choices dictate my life anymore. For now, I'm focusing on the people who genuinely support me and the future I'm building for myself. Update 3. A few weeks after sending the cease and desist letter, something unexpected happened. I received a message from a distant aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. She's my mom's younger sister and had always been somewhat removed from the family drama. In her message, she apologized for my parents' behavior, saying she had no idea things had gotten so bad. She told me she supported my decision to stand up for myself and offered to be there if I ever needed anything. I wasn't sure if I could trust her at first, but she seemed genuine. She shared some stories about her own struggles with my parents in the past, explaining why she distanced herself from them years ago. Hearing her perspective was validating. She even mentioned that some of the extended family had started to see through my parents' narrative after my post went viral on Reddit. It felt good to know that not everyone was blindly taking their side. Of course, my parents didn't take this well. Word got back to them that my aunt had reached out to me, and they wasted no time labeling her a traitor. My dad apparently called her to berate her for meddling in family affairs. She didn't back down, though. Instead, she told him that their behavior was embarrassing and that they should focus on fixing their own issues instead of blaming me for everything. Knowing she had my back was a game changer. While all of this was happening, things at work were better than ever. My hard work and dedication paid off, and I landed a major promotion. Not only did my new role come with more responsibility and recognition, but it also doubled my income. For the first time in my life, I felt financially secure. I celebrated by treating myself to a gym membership and started prioritizing my health. I also picked up a few hobbies I'd put on hold, like photography and cooking. These small changes made a big difference, and I started feeling stronger and more confident every day. Meanwhile, my parents were scrambling. They sent me a long, groveling letter apologizing for everything that happened. The letter was full of guilt-tripping phrases like, "We're still your parents, and we love you no matter what, and family is all we have in the end." They also hinted that they were struggling more than ever and hoped I would find it in my heart to forgive them and come home. I didn't respond. Their actions had spoken louder than any words ever could, and I wasn't about to let them back into my life without real accountability and change. Thankfully, the legal threat seemed to have worked on my brother. After receiving the cease and desist letter, he stopped his harassment entirely. No more prank calls, no more emails to my boss, no more social media rants. It was a relief to finally have that noise cut out of my life. In the absence of family drama, my friendships flourished. I started spending more time with the people who truly supported me, treating them like the family I chose for myself. We planned weekend outings, tried new restaurants, and even organized a small Friendsgiving. For the first time in years, I had a holiday season that wasn't filled with stress or guilt trips. It was peaceful, and I didn't realize how much I needed that until I had it. Therapy also continued to be a huge source of growth. During one session, my therapist helped me see something I hadn't fully acknowledged before. I wasn't responsible for fixing my family's problems. Their financial mismanagement, their toxic behavior, their inability to change, none of it was my fault. That realization was freeing. Around the same time, I heard through mutual contacts that my parents had finally lost their house. They'd been teetering on the edge for a while, and it seemed like their poor financial decisions had finally caught up with them. Part of me felt bad for them, but I knew this was a consequence of their own choices. Extended family members who had initially taken their side began reaching out to me, apologizing for believing their version of events. Some even offered support, which I appreciated but didn't necessarily need anymore. I had built my own support system by then. On a brighter note, I also started dating someone during this time. We met through mutual friends, and what initially started as casual dates quickly turned into something more meaningful. He admired my strength and independence, and for the first time I felt truly seen and valued for who I was. It was a refreshing change from the constant judgment and criticism I'd grown up with. Feeling more stable in my life, I decided to give back in a way that felt meaningful. I made an anonymous donation to a local charity that helps people rebuild their lives after family estrangement. Knowing I could help others in similar situations brought me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in a long time. As the holidays approached, I reflected on how much my life had changed. Instead of dreading family gatherings, I looked forward to spending the season with my friends and my new partner. The peace and joy I felt were things I'd thought were out of reach for so long. Recently, I've started considering writing a memoir about my journey. Sharing my story on Reddit showed me how powerful it can be to speak up, and I want to help others who might be facing similar challenges. It's still just an idea for now, but it feels like the perfect way to close this chapter of my life while giving back at the same time. For the first time in years, I'm looking forward to what comes next. Update 4. It all started one Wednesday afternoon. I was deep into a presentation with my team when my phone buzzed repeatedly. I ignored it, thinking it was just spam or a group chat blowing up. Then, one of my coworkers slipped into the conference room and whispered that there was an issue in the lobby. Confused, I wrapped up my part of the meeting and headed downstairs to see what was going on. The scene in the lobby was chaos. My parents were there, shouting and demanding to see me. They were arguing with the receptionist, who was doing her best to remain professional. My dad was the loudest, yelling about how he had every right to speak to me and how I was ignoring their desperate attempts to reconnect. My mom was sobbing dramatically, adding to the spectacle. I froze for a second, then stepped back out of sight and called security. Within minutes, the company's security team arrived and started escorting my parents out. That's when things got worse. My dad began shouting accusations, claiming I was a terrible son who had abandoned my family after everything they'd done for me. He tried to twist the story, saying they had come here out of love, but I was too cold-hearted to even give them the time of day. As they were being removed, I noticed one of my coworkers discreetly filming the scene on their phone. I didn't stop them. At that point, I figured having some evidence of the incident might actually help. Once my parents were finally out of the building, I returned to my desk, trying to process what had just happened. But by the end of the day, the video had already made its way through the office grapevine and onto social media. The clip wasn't long, just enough to show my parents being escorted out while yelling accusations at me. It didn't take long for people to start dissecting the situation online. Some users sided with my parents, claiming I must have done something horrible for them to act this way, but the majority called out their behavior as manipulative and embarrassing. My parents must have seen the comments because, the very next day, they released a video of their own. In their heartfelt video, my parents sat together on the couch, looking teary-eyed and defeated. They told a one-sided story about how they had sacrificed everything for me, only for me to cut them out of my life. They said they were desperate to talk to me and accused me of being brainwashed by my success. They painted themselves as victims, claiming they were heartbroken that I had chosen money over family. The video backfired almost immediately. People in the comments dissected their claims, pointing out inconsistencies and calling out the emotional manipulation. Some even referenced my earlier Reddit posts, linking the two situations and providing context that my parents had conveniently left out. It was surreal to see strangers defending me against my own family, but it also reinforced that I had made the right decision in setting boundaries. Still, I knew I needed to take things a step further. The incident at work crossed a line, and I couldn't risk them showing up again. With the help of my lawyer, I filed for a restraining order against my parents. It was a tough decision, but one that felt necessary after everything they'd done. I provided the court with evidence, including the video of the workplace incident and screenshots of their previous harassment. While all of this was unfolding, my brother found a new way to insert himself into the chaos. He began calling me from unknown numbers, leaving threatening voicemails. In one message, he accused me of tearing the family apart and promised I'd regret it if I didn't make things right. I filed a police report for harassment, handing over the voicemails as evidence. The officers assured me they'd look into it, and I was relieved to have even more documentation of my family's behavior. Despite all the drama, my therapist helped me stay grounded. She reminded me that enforcing boundaries wasn't cruel, it was an act of self-care. Her guidance made it easier to push past the guilt that my parents had instilled in me for years. Amid the turmoil, there was a bright spot. I received another promotion at work, marking yet another milestone in my career. My friends and coworkers organized a small celebration, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could truly enjoy myself without looking over my shoulder. Meanwhile, my aunt stepped up in a big way. She started reaching out to extended family members, helping them understand the truth about the situation. Her efforts eased some of the tension, and a few relatives even reached out to apologize for taking my parents' side initially. Having her support made a huge difference. By the end of it all, I realized something important: my parents weren't going to change. They were too caught up in their own narrative to see the harm they were causing. Accepting that brought me a strange sense of peace. I didn't have to keep fighting for a relationship that wasn't healthy. Instead, I could focus on the people who truly cared about me and the life I was building. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm truly free. The holidays are around the corner, and I'm looking forward to spending them with my friends and my partner, surrounded by positivity and love. As hard as this journey has been, I know I made the right choice. Update 5. Life has been quiet, and in the best way possible. Cutting ties with my parents was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it's also been the most freeing. For the first time in years, I've been able to focus on myself without the constant weight of their expectations dragging me down. The peace that came with no contact has allowed me to grow in ways I never thought possible. One of the most rewarding things I've done recently is volunteering at a nonprofit that helps people navigate toxic family dynamics. I started small, helping with community events and sharing resources, but it quickly became something I was passionate about. Meeting others who've gone through similar situations has been eye-opening. There's something powerful about being able to say, "I've been there," and helping someone else feel less alone. Meanwhile, I started hearing through the grapevine about my parents' financial situation. After losing their house, they filed for bankruptcy. It seems the reality of their choices is catching up to them, and their once loyal extended family is beginning to question their version of events. A few relatives have even reached out to apologize for taking their side, admitting they were wrong to judge me without knowing the full story. It's bittersweet, but I appreciate the effort. My brother, surprisingly, also made an attempt to reconnect. He sent a short email after the legal notice was finalized, saying he wanted to apologize for everything. The tone was tentative, almost unsure, as if he wasn't fully committed to making amends. I decided not to respond. I've learned that actions speak louder than words, and unless I see genuine effort over time, I'm not opening that door again. On the professional front, things couldn't be better. I was recently offered a senior leadership role at my company, a huge step forward in my career. It's not just a promotion, it's a testament to how far I've come despite everything that's happened. The pay increase means I can finally start planning for the future on my own terms, and the added responsibilities are exactly the kind of challenge I've been looking for. One of the first things I did with my newfound stability was buy a house. It's a modest place, nothing extravagant, but it's mine. Walking through the front door for the first time felt surreal. This house represents more than just financial independence. It's a symbol of freedom from the control my family once had over my life. I've even started decorating it with my partner, who's been my rock through all of this. Speaking of my partner, there's been another major milestone. During a quiet evening at home, they proposed. It was simple, heartfelt, and perfect. They told me they admired my strength and independence, and that they couldn't imagine a future without me in it. Saying yes was the easiest decision I've ever made. We're now planning our future together, and I couldn't be more excited for what's to come. Therapy has continued to play a big role in my journey. One breakthrough moment came during a recent session when I fully internalized something my therapist had been telling me all along. My family's behavior was never my fault. Their choices, their actions, and their inability to change weren't things I could control, and I don't owe them anything. Realizing that was like shedding a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. As part of my healing process, I decided to share an update on Reddit. I wanted to thank the community that had supported me throughout this journey and offer encouragement to anyone else dealing with similar struggles. I detailed everything, from the workplace drama to the legal action, and finally reaching a place of peace. The post went viral almost immediately, with thousands of comments praising my perseverance and strength. Seeing how many people resonated with my story was overwhelming in the best way. Some commenters even shared how my posts inspired them to set boundaries with their own toxic families. Knowing that my experiences could help others was incredibly validating. It also pushed me to take things a step further. I've started writing a blog to document my journey in more detail. The goal is to create a resource for anyone feeling trapped by family dynamics, offering advice and solidarity to those who need it most. In addition to the blog, I've begun donating anonymously to programs that help people rebuild their lives after family estrangement. Whether it's funding therapy sessions, legal aid, or community workshops, I want to give back in a way that truly makes a difference. Helping others find their way out of toxic situations feels like the perfect way to honor the progress I've made. As I reflect on everything that's happened, I feel a deep sense of gratitude, not for the pain, but for the lessons it taught me. My family's behavior forced me to grow in ways I never anticipated, and while I wouldn't wish that kind of experience on anyone, I'm proud of the person I've become because of it. This chapter of my life is finally coming to a close. I've built a life filled with love, respect, and peace, and I'm excited for what's ahead. While my family may never understand the choices I've made, I've learned that their understanding isn't necessary for my happiness. Moving forward, I'm choosing to focus on the people and opportunities that bring joy into my life. For the first time in years, the future feels bright, and I can't wait to see what's next.